Hi there. Today we are going to be talking about sharing is caring, especially in Slate. So to start off with agenda, we're going to introduce ourselves so you know who you're talking to. We're going to define what a shared instance is, and then we're going to talk about a case study for user access. And then we're going to round it out with some resources so you know how to get started after this presentation. So without further ado, my name is Courtney Muma. I am the Assistant Director of Student Success here at Carnegie. I've been a Slate user since 2019, and I've been on this Carnegie team since 2022, and I am the confident and enthusiastic thrill seeker.
And hi, I'm Justin Pierce. I'm a senior Slate admissions implementation strategist at Carnegie. I've been a Slate user since 2015, and I've been at Carnegie since 2022, and I'm the confident and energetic magician. So we know that if you're watching this, you might be using an admissions instance of Slate. Maybe you already have a student success instance or thinking about implementing student success, or maybe even are an advancement for Slate user. And all of these kinds of databases for Slate can be used in a shared instance. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So first and foremost is what is a shared instance? We want to make sure we're defining that for everyone. And that's a combination of two or more distinct populations of records in a single instance. Commonly entails more than one governing body in that single instance. So the most common examples are things like admissions and student success together in one instance of Slate. Maybe you're thinking about this for undergrad and graduate admissions together, maybe admissions all the way through advancement. All can be use cases for sharing an instance of Slate. And so for a lot of folks, we start off with the decision the decision to share an instance of Slate. How do you make that decision? What goes into it? Who should be involved? So we talked to some of our partner institutions about their decision to share an instance of Slate. We asked them about the key conversations that they had, that their teams had, who should be involved, and we want to share those answers today. And so some of the first decisions even go back to before deciding on Slate as a system that they'd use, comparing Slate to other CRMs and making sure it was the right system for them. And to do that, they even had a selection committee, bringing together stakeholders from around campus to be involved in that conversation. Initially deciding on Slate and then recognizing the benefits that using a preferred partner has when implementing, experts in the implementation process and using Slate. And so that's how we ended up working with so many of these partners, is their recognition that Slate is often best when you have folks helping you out with that expertise. And so we asked about specifically their decision to share an instance of Slate. What were the considerations that went into it? And of course, the answers are financial, operational, internal resourcing, but a few other things came up when we asked this question. And a couple of interesting bullet points here were that they heard it would be easier to split a shared instance than combine separate instances in the future if that was what was needed. And certainly that rings true, that you can be really intentional up front if you know you're going to share an instance to set yourself up for success in the long run. Our partner institution looked around at the surrounding institutions to see what they were doing, benchmarked themselves against their peers, and they recognized that with Slate, it would be free to share, something that isn't true about some of the other software systems that they were considering during that process. And so before we go any further, we really want to make sure that we direct folks to reading the knowledge base article about considerations for administering student success and admissions in a shared database. There are a lot of important items discussed there, things to think about to help get you started, to have some internal conversations. So definitely make sure if you haven't read this article yet, that's a great place to start to get things going. And so through our work, Courtney and myself and Carnegie are working on a number of shared instances. We've come across some positives, some negatives, some highs and lows, some roses and thorns that we wanted to go over of what makes it good to share and what are some things that we want to keep in our mind when we're making this decision. So in Slate, access customization, user access. When someone logs in, what do they see? Incredibly customizable. One of the big benefits of Slate is that you can set it up to share. And so it's possible, which isn't always true in all software systems. So cross-team collaboration, sharing an instance forces you to work together. And some of our partners come back and say, this is a really good thing that they did. They were happy that they were pushed to collaborate and work together across campus and participate in team decision making, have their weekly team meetings, be on the same page, learn from each other, talk to each other, and move in the same direction while acknowledging that they needed to make some decisions about how to work together and how to have shared data and how to separate those things out, how to make sure that the right users were touching the right data at the right times in the process. And so sharing helped them in that journey. On the flip side is sharing an instance forces coordination and communication. And if you have separate offices that aren't used to working together, to coordinating, to communicating, this can result in slow decision making. And if you're on a tight timeline, this can cause issues. We've seen a lack of decision makers, a lack of folks willing to make a decision that spanned more than their office, as well as too many decision makers all trying to make different decisions throughout the implementation, resulting in building the same thing over and over again instead of capitalizing on Slate's efficiencies and the different customization tools that exist, and having differing priorities of what's most important both during implementation and afterward for making changes and maintaining the system in the future. And so my biggest concern is always that we end up building a camel, which is a horse built by committee, and that we need someone who can take that step back, see everything from a broader perspective, and make sure we're all moving in the same direction together. So what does the actual implementation process look like if you've made the decision to share your instance? And so again, we went to our partners and asked some questions about what are the conversations that they were having on campus? What are things that they had on their radar that came up during the process? And so the pace of implementation and how quickly decisions needed to be made was a big one. Thinking about your timeline, there's so many things that you need to set up and that can be set up and can be customized in Slate during implementation, that if you start to fall behind, will you continue to meet your timelines? And so implementations feel like a lot of time if you're looking at months and months in front of you, but there's work to be done the whole time, and decisions do need to be made quickly. Was a big one that you want to look at that timeline. Discussion of automation and automating processes. What can be automated? What should be automated? What shouldn't be automated during that process and remain manual? And so these were important discussions that came up before the implementation started, but also throughout that process. And since we're specifically talking about sharing between admissions and student success, a big piece that comes up with our partners is orientation, bridging that gap between being admitted and enrolling in the institution and that student success piece. And where does orientation fit? Who owns it? Who's responsible? Where does the decision making lie when we start to build these tools in Slate for orientation? And so we asked the same kinds of conversations from the student success side. What are things that came up? And from student success, it was a lot of integration work with other systems on campus. When are you doing that integration? At what point in the process, both at what point in the student journey and in the implementation process, will the integration take place? And what data is moving back and forth? We know we need to engage with these other systems on campus. Portal work. When we get to student success, how will students interact and how will other folks interact with Slate and with Slate data? And there's a much bigger emphasis on portals at that point in the process as well. So understanding what a portal is, how it can be used, how it can be built and maintained, as well as understanding that there's so much customization you can do in Slate. What are the priorities? What are the priorities during the implementation process, as well as what are the priorities for year one, year two, year three, and beyond? What are the nice to haves versus the need to haves, and making those important decisions during that implementation process? And so as Courtney and I stepped back and looked at these shared instances that we've built and implemented together, we identified a couple of themes that have come up. So timeline. Timeline is key because there kind of is never a right time to implement a new system. There are constant things that you are always doing as staff on campus, from admissions work and recruitment and admitting students and decisioning and yield, and there are always new initiatives coming down. So rather thinking about, what is our go live? When do we have to have an app open? Are we losing access to a different system? What is our timeline? Can we work backwards to understand big milestones along the way? Looking at your implementation team, who should be involved from the very beginning? Who do we need to bring in partway through just for part of the implementation? What does the implementation team look like after you're implemented? Do we have a different team for shared governance? And we'll look at that in just a second. How are we doing the work throughout the implementation? Get time on calendars early. If you're working in a shared instance, if you're implementing a shared instance, by definition, that means you're working with folks in other offices and units on campus. Get together, put that time on the calendar, commit to it early, and make sure you're doing the work together throughout the entire time. And one of the things that came up from our partners was a note on special populations. Make sure you know who these folks are and that you keep them in mind. You might not be able to build everything you want in year one as you look at prioritizing what you need to get up and running versus what you want to get up and running in the future. And so if you have a special population that won't be part of year one, how will we be helping those students in year one before they might transition into Slate if we're building for the 90% upfront? So don't forget about them. Have a plan, even if that plan isn't Slate in year one, knowing that it might be in year 2 or year 3. And so talking about shared governance of a shared instance, getting people together across campus to make these important decisions that go beyond one particular office or unit. So we were so lucky that one of our partners was willing to share more information about their Slate leadership team. What does that mean? What does that look like? As well as their Slate working group. And how do these groups look similar in some aspects, deans of different areas, versus how are they different? Who is making big, broad decisions, driving the conversation, and who is in there actually doing the work when those decisions are made, and being the Slate experts, being the Slate captains in that Slate working group. And so having this shared governance and having this multi-level approach is something that worked for them and that they wanted to share with others. So consider who's on this list. How well do these people already work together? What is their relationship? What are the power dynamics and the political things to consider on campus? Do these folks work well together? Do they have shared goals? Sharing an instance of Slate might make sense. Do these folks struggle to work together? Do they not have shared goals and shared priorities? Is sharing an instance of Slate going to lead to success? And so as we talk to our partners about shared governance, we asked some questions about what this looks like and how this changed from implementation teams to shared governance for maintenance in the future. And they talked a lot about joint responsibility and some of the different offices that you saw listed on those teams, about undergraduate admissions, graduate studies, their student success team, since this was a shared admissions and student success instance with both undergraduate and graduate students in the admissions process and student success. They brought in IT, and they even hired a CRM manager who worked in IT and was considered sort of that neutral territory when things needed to cross between these existing units and make some decisions and better understand how decisions would affect others in the system, and sort of sat outside of those areas.
Thank you so much, Justin, for that overview. So you hear all of those slides, you see the list of people who are all involved in making the decision and in charge of maintaining the system after you make the decision to share. Now, if you are seeing this and thinking, how the heck do we make sure that everybody plays nicely within the same sandbox? I have a couple questions for you. Do you feel confident in your user access setup as it exists right now? Are you using realms? And do you have concerns about sharing data across users and offices? And if your answer is yes to any one of those questions, that's okay. That means you're in the majority of the population who is considering to share. So let's take a few minutes to debunk and demystify what it looks like to share within Slate. So First off, we got to start off with some definitions, and these are Slate tools that we will be using to break down the different permissions and how to make sure that the right people are seeing the right things on student records. So starting off, user permissions. This is what a user can do. This is tied to the different tools and functionalities and those little icons that you see when you click into Slate. And then it gets granular of what can you actually do when you click onto forms. Can you make a new form? Can you see all forms? Can you only click on the forms that you were the user for? Those are what are considered user permissions. Roles are a bundle of permissions for consistent user access. Please do not assign every user every permission and have the same permissions for a bunch of users without using roles. Roles are for consistency across the system. You can also filter and query on users within roles themselves. So if you're looking for all of your academic advisors or all of your counselors, having everybody in that kind of umbrella population for users within that role is a really helpful way to do so. Populations are groups of records that a student can access. So thinking about like an undergraduate admissions record, we have academic advisors, we have counselors, we have graduate admissions folks. We want to make sure that they are just seeing the populations of students who they should be seeing. We're going to dig into how to make that definition in a second as well. And then realms are what objects can a user access. So technically, somebody might have the user permission for a specific tool within Slate, but it's underneath a specific realm that I don't have access to. And so I might get a forbidden error. And I'll show you what an example of that looks like in a minute, but realms are accessed or are added to different tools within the system to grant permission to different areas within Slate. So let's take a look at how roles and permissions are set up and how naming conventions of roles can be similar, but the actual permissions themselves are very different. So in here, this is a little video of one of our partners' role and user permission. So we're looking at a graduate assistant role, and you can see that there's a handful of roles that we have within the system because we got pretty granular in what people can see when they are logged into Slate. This example here again is the graduate assistant role. We also have some custom permissions. So everything up at the top here is the Slate provided permission, but if you create new entities or you create a new data set, something like that, you can create your own custom permissions for that. We do that very often within student success. And here we are looking at a different role that has similar permissions, but a different naming convention. And so you can see that we do not have the same custom permission as the other role. And then we have a general student success one. This is kind of our broad permission for all of our student success users, where we're granting just record lookup and then our custom permission for student success. Custom permissions can be added to things like tabs and dashboards. So let's take a look and see what that looks like in practice. So in this example, I'm in that same partner client instance. I am impersonating the graduate assistant role. This is what my dashboard looks like. This is my test record in here. I am showing a lot of admissions specific or recruitment specific information. And then here are my tabs. It's kind of the baseline information that comes when Slate is provisioned. But if I change my permission or my impersonation to the student success admin role, whoa, things are looking pretty different. We have our student success specific dashboard to show our current student information, which is different than our admissions information. And you can also see our custom student success tabs up here at the top. How we define student success versus admissions, that's the $1 million question depending on which institution you're talking to. But in general, because we build out so many different processes for student success, this is a good example. We can see we have registration history and we have student schedule. These are all imported in from your SIS. We generally define our current students as ones with either a registration history row, which is like your enrollment status. This term I was good standing, a biology major, and I didn't apply to graduate, that kind of information. And then student schedule is the courses that you're enrolled in. We typically look for the existence of a row of information in either one of those tables to define your current student. If you don't have a row of information in either one of those tables, the assumption is that you haven't matriculated yet. You haven't registered for courses. You have not enrolled in the term yet, because those are the triggers for those files to come over from your SIS. So in broad strokes, that is how we in Slate define those two variables, admissions versus student success. And we can see how that plays out in the display characteristics for both the student record and the folks who have access to seeing those two different records themselves. If we continue going along, we took a look at our person records, but I want to talk a little bit about realms. Realms are those system objects and the visibility thereof. So I'm impersonating yet another record, our student success undergraduate realm. There are a handful of different tools within Slate which are realmable: events, scheduler, forms, deliver, query. Pretty much all of these little icons up at the top can have a realm within them. And this is how we have pretty high walls across the system, especially when you're sharing. Your graduate team probably doesn't need to see all of the academic advising appointments that are happening on the calendar. So you'll want to put those in a realm just to keep the noise down for the visualization of those calendars. So in here, we are looking at our events for our undergraduate realm, and this is what I see when I'm looking at our events. Didn't add any filters in here. I didn't click on anything else. I just impersonated a user with the student success undergraduate realm, and I can only see one event happening here. If I didn't know any better, I would assume that that is the only event that is happening within the system. But when I impersonate somebody else, I have the undergraduate and graduate realm. Those are combined. Those aren't two stacked roles. These are one singular realm. I can see that, whoa, we have a lot more events happening. Again, didn't add any filters. You can see I don't have any custom list fields happening here, but we can see that there are a lot more events happening within here. And that is just because these events are within the realm that I have access to. And I alluded to it earlier, but I have the student success undergraduate realm. So the same one that we saw in that first example, but my specific user does not have permission to events. So those two things go hand in hand. There is not one of those tools that I defined earlier that is better or worse or more important than the other. The intention is that they all work together to create this curated experience for the users who are logging into the system. I'm going to say that again because it's very important. There is no one tool that is more important than the other. They are supposed to work together to create this curated experience for your users. Please make sure that you're exploring each one to determine which one is best fit for the users who are logging into the system. So let's go through some key takeaways now that we've talked about the considerations, the conversations, and then how to do it in broad strokes. You're going to want to have discussions with your team of how to set this up. After seeing this, I think one of the biggest takeaways is the educational right to know. This was one of the big takeaways that we had with our partner, which guided them to this specific setup. Not everybody needed to see everything. Did some people want to see everything? Yeah, sure, of course, but that is not the purpose. We have an educational right to know, to see information. Is it harmful for student success users to see admissions data? No, but do they need to know what was on their decision letter? Probably not. And so that's where the conversations and the strategic role creation specifically for student success really comes into play. What do they need to know about the students who were in admissions before they were imported in? Do they need to see all of that? Yes or no? That's a conversation that y'all can have. And then there also needs to be some trust built between the different units using Slate. There needs to be trust within your admissions team to know that your student success team isn't going to come in and mess up the sandbox that they've been building in for the last couple of years. I don't know about y'all, but once you start building in Slate, you get really attached to the projects that you're creating. You get really proud of the system that you built, which is good. You should have pride in the work that you do, but passing off the reins to somebody else coming in can be really tough. So, like Justin was mentioning earlier, those internal meetings, those shared goals, the shared mantra of what we are doing and why we are doing it together is really important, just to make sure that the trust is gained between everybody and the intentions are set ahead of time that we are in this together. We're not out to get everybody. And even if we don't agree on decisions, knowing that it is for the betterment of your students who you're both recruiting and retaining, that is the most important part. So keep that at the forefront of your minds as you're having these conversations. Okay, after all of that, do you feel ready to do all of the things? If the answer is no, that's okay. We have a couple extra resources. So we have the suitcase ID here that we created, which is a query to show the roles, permissions, and populations and realm access by user. So suitcase this into your system and it'll show you all of that information. So you can kind of do an audit of who has access to what and where. And you can kind of see if there's trends between roles. If one role has the same permissions, but they're called different things, maybe that's an opportunity to consolidate those roles and name it something more generic. And then this QR code is a student success example file. Before we start building kind of anything within student success, we start out by going through this example file to determine what the common fields are that we need to create a full student record. I alluded to the registration history file earlier. If you scan this code, you'll see what all of the data points are that we have in there. It's really just to track student progress throughout their time, but feel free to use that as you're getting ready to start working with your IT team of what files you need to create those student success records. And that's it. Thank you so much for spending some time and listening to us talk about why sharing can work really well and the considerations thereof. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either Justin or I. Our emails are listed here. Thank you.